right, Martin Popoff here from the Contrarians, back again with another edition of Reliving Old Reviews as a Useless Tool of Confusion. This is the show where we look at an old classic review and see if the writer got it right on an album that got pretty big. Boy, we are talking about a big one today. We are talking about AC/DC Back in Black with a review by the great Phil Sutcliffe. I'm sure he's going to get it right. In Sounds Magazine, July 26, 1980. And if you think Kerrang was, the great place to enjoy your new wave of British heavy metal coverage, Sounds was even more important because it was right there on the ground. Sounds is the precursor to Kerrang. I've got right here, just to show you my very first edition of Kerrang, number 1, June 1981. So the new wave of British heavy metal was well on its way. And coincidentally, we have Angus on the cover of the first Kerrang. But this is Phil writing for Sounds. Sounds had all sorts of new wave of British heavy metal coverage. Not to say that AC/DC is a new wave of British heavy metal band, but they are right in there like a dirty shirt. One of my favorite bands of all time. Of course, I've written this AC/DC at 50 book recent. I still have these at martinpopoff.com. I can sign and send them out. For some reason, this is one of the few ones that was shrink wrapped when I get them. So I have to carefully open them up to sign them. But of course, I can do all that. And at Christmas time, and please let me know that it is for somebody else. I always have that stress of, who am I signing this thing to? Anyways, let's get back to it. So, I haven't read this review, so I am going in cold here. I might have read it years ago. I don't know. But yeah, let's take a look and see if Phil got this right. The momentous Back in Black album. We've got a picture of the band, them looking all young and innocent, shorter hair kind of thing, especially on Phil Rudd. It's whatchamacallit line says AC/DC Brian Johnson hiding bald spot under convenient cap, and we get a big heading back with the bully boys. AC/DC Back in Black. In circumstances like this, the first album after the death of a favorite and crucial member of the band, it's easy to get confused about your reactions. Spontaneous feelings are there, no doubt, but they carry the burden of regret. The ecstasy with which I expect to press a new AC/DC greet a new AC/DC album just wasn't a possibility this time. Interesting. Bon Scott's replacement until later and deal with the constant factors. Great writing to start off with from Phil. He's giving us the mood that, obviously this is, extenuating circumstances. It's not all happiness here with the new AC/DC album. AC/DC, wild and reliable, have delivered again. That's the fundamental truth. The very slight hints on Highway to Hell that they were Americanizing is softening their approach, have been elbowed aside. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think there's kind of a roughness to Back in Black that isn't there on Highway to Hell. You could, you think of songs like Get It Hot, maybe Shot Down in Flames, maybe the title track. There are a few things on that record where, it's pretty commercial. I love it. I mean, it's probably my favorite AC/DC album, but the hazards of recording at Compass Point in Bahamas have been dismissed so peremptorily. It might be that they spent the whole time monkishly in a darkened room and never set foot on the beach. In other words, they continue to be the best hard rock band in the world, to my mind. Very cool. Nice writing there, Phil. At least 5 of the tracks have that adamantine toughness, which I think they brought to 24 karat perfection a couple of years ago with Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. Yeah, that's all. Audie would mention that song. As you've heard me say before, at the great Toronto SARS-Stock concert, the band actually opened with that song, which was really bizarre. It's the solidity of Phil Rudd on drums and Cliff Williams on bass, enhanced by the blood empathy of the Young Brothers. Blood empathy. That's a pretty cool word, term. Their different energies dovetail. The barmy fire of Angus and the sheer malice Malcolm gathers into his rhythm playing. They share a sense of timing and the power of the empty space around their megawatts. Yeah, that's a great way of putting, this idea of the Ron Wood, Keith Richards weave that you get out of Malcolm and Angus. It's all about the space. It's all about the slight offsetting of things. It's all about them playing, even when they're playing in lockstep rhythm, they're playing slightly different parts, or voicings or phrasings kind of thing, right? That's why some of their most forceful efforts are in their slower tracks when the pendulum can swing in full weight. Back in Black and Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution are classics in this vein. They punch you like old Joe Frazier and you grunt with pleasure. I've heard a lot of people really liking Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. I've always considered it one of my least favorite songs on the album. That title is kind of awkward and clunky. Yeah, it's a good song. I mean, everything on this album is great. But yeah, it's one of my least favorites, and I see it brought up a lot as a total favorite. It's pretty interesting. Those are the familiar virtues, the qualities that give AC/DC the lasting look at the Stones or status quo. But there is a different flavor about this LP, an intangible feeling that the grief of Bon Scott's death has expressed itself even through the heavy riffs, which are probably the least sensitive form of rock. Wow, yeah. So he's calling riffs the least sensitive form of rock, and how the grief is expressed through the riffs. That's a neat idea there, Phil. Yeah, you can kind of hear it. There's kind of a darkness. I've always talked about the darkness coming from the album cover, and more so had it not had that kind of album cover, maybe it wouldn't have seemed so dark. But I like that idea. That's a pretty interesting concept. If anything, the rhythm seems stronger than ever before because Angus buries himself in there in the thick of the riff, head down, working like a Trojan, but playing almost as if he didn't want to be noticed. His solos are perfunctory, with the odd exceptions of his outbursts in You Shook Me All Night Long and Shake a Leg, which are otherwise two of the more ordinary tracks. Wow, that's a cool idea as well. This idea that that Angus is kind of heads down, doesn't want to be noticed. Yet these songs are all about riffs. It's and some of that might come from the very rounded off, less spiky production that Mutt Lange gives this album than he does Highway to Hell, right? Let's see. Well, I imagine even Manic Schoolboy Guitar Heroes handled the death of a close friend in much the same way as anyone else. An erratic sequence of repressed and released emotion. Somewhere in there is the explanation for why this is the first AC/DC album I've ever thought of as cold. I think of Let There Be Rock as cold lately. I mean, that album as that and Volume 4, I think I did a whole History in 5 Songs episode on is this music depressing kind of idea. So cold and depressing to me kind of mean the same thing, and I definitely feel that out of records like Volume 4, Paranoid, Deep Purple in Rock, and Let There Be Rock. But yeah, I'm not particularly this one. Again, I think the album cover goes a long way towards taking you to that thought. On reflection, I suspect it's more of a matter of tight rein, stiff upper lip. Interesting, which brings me to Brian Johnson, the new singer, who has also taken on Bond's role as lyric writer. Essentially, I just don't like him. Interesting. It seems to me that in every respect, including appearance, the band's instincts led them against their better judgment to select the closest copy of Bond they could find. This idea, we all grew, and I'm sure Phil did too. We all grew to like Brian pretty quickly. I don't know anybody who doesn't like Brian Johnson. I love the guy. But I can understand upon first listen. I remember back to first listen to this as well. Thinking his vocals were almost like a little too extreme or a little too hysterical, and having to fit into this role of writing these Bond-style lyrics, which, grew to be later on a very mysterious sort of world of who is doing these lyrics kind of thing. And I'm sure there's a lot of working together to come up with what they do, because AC/DC, despite making it look easy, is very meticulous, right? But yeah, I do kind of remember that as well, and it's just natural that, you're going to stand there as a longtime fan, arms crossed, this guy's got to prove himself first kind of thing. So I think there's a bit of that going on here. Let's see what else he said. It seems to me that in every respect, okay, we read that. The outcome is that both the closeness and differences are damaging. Sentimentally, it feels awkward. Musically, it tastes bad. Bond wasn't exactly a great vocalist, but he sounded like nobody else. He wasn't skillful enough to imitate anyone if he'd wanted to. Johnson is much more of a pro, and he sees AC/DC as needing your standard Plant, Halford, heavy metal howl and growl, the dreadful grossness that degenerated out of the R&B influence on British music in the late 60s. It's all style and no content. Specifically, what's missing is Bond's humor and salty character. I would disagree with Phil that he sounds like a pro or is a pro. I mean, he's basically gone back to his day job, his almost blue collar job. He's running some kind of a business at this point. He was in Geordie. He was never a massive rock star. They made some albums and stuff, but yeah, definitely not a polished pro. And I think, like I say, he's almost more rough and wild than Bon was. Okay, to put it in Deep Purple terms, I reckon that what AC/DC needed for a fresh approach was a bluesy Coverdale, and what they got was a screeching Gillan. Yeah, I think in a way they got a screech, Gillan when he screeches, screeching Gillan. And obviously it worked out famously. And like I said, we all love him, and this album was massive. His lyrics go the same way. Ever the skilled professional, cliche, operating in a fantasy limbo of hard drinking, macho, unrelated to anything recognizable as human life, as opposed to the best of Bon, which were dirty, true talk, such as Whole Lotta Rosie and the Jack. He rants on about taking no prisoners, and you're only young, but you're going to die. All pointless and worn out stuff. I'm not suggesting that my sheet is kind of cut up here. By the way, this raft of these that you're going to see in the next little while, very much thanks to Chris Jackson for sending these in. Very cool. He sent a bunch of most of the old ones as well. So really cool. Nice PDFs, easy to read. But yeah, the page is a little wrinkled here, as Bon, decorum would always sift out such crass lines. Yeah, interesting. Obviously, Brian has to, just fall right into AC/DC world and Bon's world. So yeah, some of these lines seem a little clunky. And I also always have the feeling that when you get a new singer into a band, this wasn't a huge band, but they're a pretty big band at this point. You can't have too much bravado, right? Especially when when you get a baby singer into a band who's like 5 years younger than everybody else, kind of thing. That's not the case here, but that sort of idea. So yeah, when you come in and you are acting like the leader, I mean, it's a fine line you have to do here, but yeah, you're only young, but you're gonna die, all that kind of stuff. It's like, sometimes it can be a little too over the top because that new singer has to be there for a little while first, right? But Johnson hardly offers anything else, even when he aspires to a touch of wit. With a line like working double time on the seduction line, it has an unsavory element of heavy metal's worst bully boy attitude towards women. Yeah, people have said that about the Brian lyrics. They just, like Phil says here, lack the humor, have a little bit too much edge, or maybe a little bit too nasty kind of thing sometimes. I don't know. I don't mean anything personal against Brian Johnson. I'm not saying he's a nasty chap, and he's obviously tried very hard to fit the bill, but I think his and the band's assessment of AC/DC's needs were wrong. Either he didn't have the time or the capability to get into the spirit of the group, which is a shame. It's also quite a tribute to the rest of them that Back in Black remains a genuine, excellent AC/DC album. Great writing there from Phil. This was a really cool review. And yeah, he's expressing all of those, early doubts that quickly evaporated, I think, with Brian coming into the band. Obviously, as the cliche goes, he had very big boots to fill. And so he is a little concerned about that. But otherwise, yeah, just a very cool review. So there you go. Another edition of Reliving Old Reviews is a useless tool of confusion. Please subscribe. We're trying to keep those numbers up. Please comment below. Let us know what you think of Phil's review and my review of Phil's review. And like I say, AC/DC, where's that book? AC/DC at 50. You can get this at martinpopoff.com. There's PayPal buttons there for international, US, Canada, all that kind of stuff. And let's just show this again while we're here. The very first Korean with Angus on the cover. There you go. Talk to you later.